Perfect. This is my first time being translated. Usually I'm the translator. So stick with me. If there's anything that you want to ask, go ahead. Where it comes to the chat, can everyone go ahead and share with me the emoji of how they feel today? I don't know what it's like in Colombia, but in Mexico, my husband is Mexican. They're obsessed with stickers. So if you have stickers, like, you know, these WhatsApp chats with like thousands of stickers, if you have a sticker, go ahead and share it. Or if you have an emoji, go ahead and share it. And I want you to go ahead in the chat and then let me know how you're feeling today. So go ahead, begin with your emojis. You can share. Perfect. I love it. Okay. We got lots of smiley faces. Perfect. The reason why I wanted everyone to kind of get used to the chat, because sometimes the chat is like a blank sheet of paper. You know, sometimes if there's like a blank sheet of paper in the table, no one touches it, right? But if it's, you know, if it's already drawn on, then you go ahead and scribble. So now the chat is no longer a blank sheet of paper. Use it as much as you like. Use the chat not only to communicate between you and I, but also with other participants. Also, even use it as a memo. If there's any notes you want to take, just take them directly into the chat so you can even share it with people. Before we begin, if anyone is in a position where they can turn on their camera, please go ahead and turn on their camera. I know that's not always possible, but if you can, that would be amazing. Wonderful. Okay, everyone. So, hola, my name is Brittany. Unfortunately, my Spanish is not good enough to hold this presentation, but I can certainly very confidently order, un taco con toño here in Mexico, no problem. But this presentation will certainly be in English. So I'm very looking forward to spending the time with you today. I hope that we address culture, which was one of your classes. Particularly from a Japanese and Australian standpoint, which is my two areas. But I hope we go beyond culture. I hope we go beyond culture to not only look at a national culture, but I hope that we can look at it in terms of innovation ecosystems, in terms of the kinds of environments people need to thrive, and the kind of environments businesses need to succeed. So if that's the kind of thing that you're looking to hear about, let's get into it. Okay, so I'm going to begin sharing my screen. Okay, perfect. So this is, let me just make sure I can see. You can maybe all see. Can you see my screen? Give me a thumbs up.
Yes,
perfect. All righty, wonderful. Let's get into it. Also, everybody, don't worry. I can send these slides directly to Andres. So if you don't worry about taking notes or anything like that, I'll send them over so he can send them out to you. Sorry, Andres, I'm already giving you homework and we haven't even started. I hope that's okay. All righty. Okay, everyone. So just a little bit about me. So as Andres said, I co-founded a company, and I'm the managing director of Design Thinking Japan. Design Thinking Japan has really existed since 2014 in different ways, in Latin America, but most certainly in Japan, and then also in
Brittany?
But we can certainly then talk about it and the kinds of people, we're into the kinds of thousands of people of, supporting thousands of people. The kinds of things that we do is two things, right? So there's two things that our agency does. One is innovation, right? Innovation is one thing. However, we found that innovation cannot exist without education, right? So what does that mean? That means if you're implementing innovation initiatives, particularly in ecosystems like Japan, where you have extremely complex business environments, where you have, for example, like a larger holding company like Mitsubishi, right? Then you might have Mitsubishi Bank, then you might have Mitsubishi Motors, then you might have Mitsubishi Insurance, and then you have all these different kinds of people all collaborating under this one name. If we don't equally have invested in our innovation initiative, but if we don't equally invest in the education behind those innovation initiatives, then we find that it's not as successful. We want to train the business as much as we want to train the people. And this is maybe a takeaway for you guys. This is maybe the first one, is when it comes to innovation, when it comes to doing business, one of the first things is that we got to think about the people, right? And that's maybe where our culture comes in. So before we get further, does everybody know each other on the call? Does everyone know each other? Perfect. This is the most awesome thing about these calls. Only crazy people, the kinds of people that are wanting to change the world and that are committed to changing the world, get on a voluntary call, right? Only crazy people do that. So what I want you to do now is not only connect with me. So if you take a photo of this photo, all my connection details will come up, LinkedIn, everywhere else. But I also want you to right now add in the chat your favorite. So I'm going to like just stop this for 1 second. I want you to go now into the chat and I want you to add your most favorite way of communicating. Maybe it's LinkedIn, maybe it's Facebook, maybe whatever it is. And I want you to put it in the chat because these sessions that Andres is organizing is not only about information, it's about community. And so when and if 2020 has taught us anything, it's about the only way to get through hard things is through community. That's why quarantine is so terrible, because you feel without community. That's why we always want to connect on Zoom. So go right now and add in the chat your LinkedIn or your Facebook so you can connect with your other classmates. So when we're all done today, that you can say, hey, that was a great question, or you're also interested in IT, so am I. Write in the chat the best way to get in contact with you so that other people can reach out and you can connect. So I want you to go ahead and do that right now. I'm going to wait a second until I see some links. Perfect, exactly. Start sharing. Yes, that's great. Okay, everyone, this is about, I wasn't surprised to see some WhatsApp. I know WhatsApp is very, very popular in Latin America. Exactly. Start sharing, because this is not just about, receiving information. This is about creating community. This is about creating the international session community. And that's you guys, right? So go, as I'm talking, go ahead, just click on the links and start adding people. And then now let's get back to it. And then now you can also see, for example, me, if you want to take a photo, that's how you can get in contact with me. I host the world's only bilingual Japanese and English, I don't speak Spanish well enough yet, business karaoke podcast. So the business karaoke podcast is all about doing business in Japan. However, people often ask, why karaoke? And often when we try to introduce innovation, what it means to be innovative in Japan, kind of the idea is always like, we don't really understand it, because the word innovation is a foreign word. So if we tell the Japanese person to be open, to say whatever they want, to be free, to practice, to be loud, they would think, no, that's not me. That's not my personality, However, if we tell them we're going to karaoke, well, that's exactly the kind of personality that we need from them when they're doing innovation. So for us, instead of telling the Japanese people, let's do innovation, we tell them, let's do karaoke. And essentially, it's really kind of the same. It's the same kind of spirit. Also, if anyone's interested in design thinking, we also have this is all free. All of these resources are free. Which is, we have a design thinking meetup, so you can certainly come along, learn more about design thinking. And the other thing is that we are also the lead for MetConnecta, which also we also have services here in Latin America, also in Colombia. So if you're interested in learning more about entrepreneurship or innovation, let me know, and I can certainly introduce you to our wider MetConnecta community. Okay, let's get into it. So today we're going to be talking about not only culture, right? But we want to get in deeper to culture. So the work that we do, the reason why culture is important is because it helps us understand how to ignite creativity in the Japanese workplace, right? And if it teaches us about the how, then it also helps us understand how might we be able to support people. How might we be able to equip people with tools for change? So rather than, walking into a room and saying, this is how things are, what we do is we walk into a room and first try to understand. And through this understanding, that's where we can really help people in their innovation journey, because innovation journeys look so different. We have startups that are working in blockchain and emerging technologies. But then, for example, we have this company, like, look at the table, guys. This is a real photo. I took this photo. This is a workshop. Right? How much diversity do you see in this room? Like, not a lot, right? There's not a whole lot of diversity, not a whole lot of age diversity, gender diversity. There's just, not a whole lot of diversity. So when it comes to innovation, when it comes to culture, what we have to do is, rather than change the cultures, we first have to understand what's the existing culture. Where are they currently? And this is the first thing that we do in our business. So to give you a little bit of an idea of what we do, also, for example, do business consulting. So this is what our workshops used to look like, right, before COVID, where we would help business professionals or business consultants develop a deeper understanding or a deeper skill set for human-centric consulting. And the reason why human-centric consulting is so important is because in the past, consultants used to say, hi, here's this pen. You need this pen, right? But maybe you don't need a pen. Maybe you need something else. So rather than, for example, going in with a pen, we teach them how to be curious, how to begin with the person and ask questions like, tell me about what your needs are. And we try to understand the pain. And this, for example, is something really difficult for Japan. Japan has this culture where they have to be perfect, and they don't like to fail. So teaching Japanese consultants about how to be open and take risks, is been a really interesting journey. And I'd love to share more with you about it. This is a little bit more of what we do these days, right? Which is kind of more our online sprints. So we do a thing called design sprints, which is a 5-day design collaboration where we work with all different kinds of people in the organization to create a new product and service. And I think what's really exciting about these kinds of businesses is that because sometimes Japan is behind in many areas, it's really an opportunity for them to just leapfrog into the future without, having to take those additional steps. So, but we can't talk about doing business in 2020 without talking about the impact of COVID, right? I don't know what it is. I don't know what it's like for you guys. But if I'm listening to a leadership podcast or to a business podcast, if anything is dated pre-February 2020, I'm like, no, you don't understand the world today. I need to know how we can deal with the problems right now. So I don't know, does anyone else kind of feel like that? You can certainly raise your hand or let me know. But for me, I just think you can't teach me or you can't tell me these strategies on how to lead people when our people are currently sitting at home, their wife or their husband is next to them, they have kids running around, they have dogs barking next door. We're in a new world. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit. I wanted to use some data because I love talking about stories, right? I'm really looking forward to sharing a lot of stories with you. But I think let's have those stories on a conversation based in data, right? So I can certainly tell you about all the crazy stories that we have in Japan and all the crazy stories from Australia. But I wanted to give you a little bit, before I tell you my stories, right? I wanted to share with you a little bit of some unbiased data. So for anyone that saw the first session with Alberto Gonzalez, he talked a little bit about technology trends. So this is actually built on that presentation. So if you didn't see that presentation, no problem. You don't need to have seen it to understand this presentation. It's just a reference. So who feels that their perceptions with technology has changed? If we can can I ask you guys a question? Can you in the chat right now tell me something that you either did online or bought online that you would never in your life pre-COVID thought you would have bought? So for example, I'll tell you mine. I bought 3 liters of olive oil online. Never in my entire life would I think I would buy olive oil online. So, but there's things, things change, our behavior changes. So I'm going to be talking about, the next few slides are going to be about Japan and Australia. The first thing that maybe we need to understand is kind of the context. So Australia is kind of more this younger country with a modern history that's rich in resources, that's low in people, right? And then we have Japan, which is really the opposite, which is a much older nation, a much older nation, very poor in resources. And then they used to have quite a large population, but now, are really facing a population decline. So we have these two countries that are really almost polar opposites in the same region. But also, if we think about the APAC region, which is kind of what LATAM is here, so Latin America, APAC is Asia Pacific. So includes countries like Australia, Japan, Singapore, Taiwan, Hong Kong. They're usually the major players. And then we have other, kind of the other, up and coming economies like Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, places like that. So if we were to kind of look at what executives are kind of saying, right, post-COVID, what are they saying? And how is, and what kind of technology trends can they expect? So 78% of Australian executives acknowledge that technology has become an integral part of our human experience, right? Which means that if you're in a service business, this means that actually you're not only a service company, but you're also a technology company. And if we look at about what that means for Japan and Australia, in Japan, there tends to be a more of a lenience towards that they, recognize that technology has become really a part of the human experience. So in Japan, it's funny, actually, on a recent episode of the Business Karaoke podcast, we had Ryan Hart, who is the managing director of the Customer Experience Center for PwC in Japan. And he said, one of the reasons that Japan tends to lean towards technology, tends to lean towards AI and machine learning is because the Japanese education system is really built on this idea of things. If we think about Japanese people, we think about people who build things, right? Like a whole bunch of people working hard together who build things. And this is a little bit of the reason why we see a stronger leniency, or we see Japanese companies tending to lean towards technology more than in other countries. So, if we think about, over the next data is that we're really we're now starting to think about, technology now being a part of our lives. Do you guys remember when we used to be online and we used to say, did you have that? Like, be right back. Do you remember that? Does anyone remember that? We don't say that anymore because we're always online. You're never not online. So there's no BRB. You're just always here, right? So this is why technology really has become so much more intrinsic into our lives, and our businesses then have to then answer that call. So if we look at this, if we look at let's look at the relationship, right? So if we think about the relationship globally, right? If we have a look here, if we look on the right, you can have a look through some of the numbers that we're looking towards, even though some, people are kind of like sick and tired of Zoom, and people are saying the minute the quarantine is over, people are going to go out and they want to enjoy physical, tangible experiences. This is very true, but we also have to understand that that's not that. While that may be true, we've also got a deeper level or a higher level of digital acceptance than we ever have before. We're at you can't turn back from this point now. When you have seen your boss's dog, and when you have seen like your colleague's, living room, right? We're at a no turn back mode when it comes to technology and when it comes to the integration in our lives. So if we think about what the future will look like, we have to rethink if this is then going to be true, if the technology is not only if we're going to adopt more technology and it's going to become more intrinsic in our lives, then we should at least have a say in what that future is going to look like. We should at least then design what that future is going to look like. So we're going to walk through 5 different areas, and this is going to help us understand how Japanese companies and how Australian companies are essentially facing this kind of new economy that we are all in. So the first one is the iNN experience, which is really about that personalization and how people choose their own adventure. So one thing that we see is that enterprises have to become more collaborative partners. So this is, for example, something that Japan has done very poorly. Japan has been famous for going to places like Colombia on a business tour. So maybe they're going on an investment tour. They'll get on a plane, like these like 10 Japanese executives in their suits. They'll go to Colombia. They'll go to, for example, maybe, to mines or to areas with, high resources that they want to invest in. And then they'll listen, because what they call this is kind of like a business tour. And they go and they listen and they listen and they listen. But what they don't do is that they then don't collaborate. They don't give back. So they just sit there and listen. And this is actually not good for our global community. When it comes to collaboration, it's really a two-way street. And this is something that Japan has done really poorly. And then in the future, if they do want to become more of a global competitive player, they really are going to have to be more collaborative. They're not only going to have to go to Colombia and make an investment, they're also going to and listen. They're also going to have to come with, with a perspective. They're going to have to say, hey, we do these things in Japan. Maybe you'd like to learn it, rather than it being a one-way street. So let's think about how these enterprises are really going to become partners of experience, rather than just, providers of it. So if we look, hey, yes.
There's a question. I don't know if you want to be interrupted or at the end.
No, I love being interrupted. Go for it.
Okay, so
so this is, let me just say here,
okay.
I can't see the chat while I'm sharing my screen. So if you can interrupt me, that would be perfect. That would be perfect.
So Fran, we have the first one from Oscar Campiño. Do you see it in the chat section?
Yes, I have it here. Do you hear me, Brittany?
I see the chat right now. Now that I'm screen sharing, I can't see the chat. What I could do is
Brittany?
my phone as well.
Can you hear me, Brittany?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have a question from Oscar. It says, I understand the Japanese culture. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, okay. Once again, let me see the Oscar's question.
Oscar's asking.
Do I have to change
No.
Do I have to change to Spanish? No, okay.
No,
Because I can't hear. Or hang on, I have to be in the English channel. Wait,
Yeah.
right? Try again. Perfect. I hear you, Francisco. Okay, perfect. I hear you.
Solitude a lot, and that people prefer to avoid physical contact. Isn't this another reason to privilege technology and other ways of having contact?
Isn't this another reason to, once again?
Privilege technology and other ways of having contact?
Yeah, so bridging the gap between culture through technology has been incredibly beneficial. This is a great question, Oscar. So number one, this is absolutely true. You can imagine how Latin people feel coming to Japan and, abrazos, besitos, and then the Japanese people being like, oh my God, like fish, like dead fish, and it's terrible. And I see it and I'm just like, oh gosh, I just feel terrible for them. So this is absolutely true. This is, let me just give you a level of how true this is. My boss told me, if I saw my mother after 30 years at the airport, I would only bow. So that just gives you a clue of they just never touch. Like if you don't see your mother after 30 years, you hug her. No, he's like, even if I hadn't seen my mother for 30 years and I go to the airport and I pick her up, I would just bow. So there's absolutely no contact there. Technology is actually really great for two reasons. The Japanese they give a lot of emphasis to physical presence. They think that if you flew from Colombia to Tokyo for this meeting, even if the meeting was 30 minutes, that for them is like a sign of, he or she is taking this seriously. However, it's super inefficient. And it's also ridiculous if we think about, sustainability and, the planet and flying across the globe for 30 minutes, it doesn't make sense. So using technology, for example, like now is the perfect time. If you are, wanting to do business in Japan, this is the perfect time to open the conversations because you can meet online. Because maybe once we get a vaccine, the Japanese might revert to their old ways, of, oh no, we want you to come to Tokyo, because they want to host you. They're also a little bit kind of like, they have a little bit of that Latin kind of hospitality with, they want to host you. They want to take you and show you around. You know what I mean? It's not like in Germany where you go there and, they don't really care. So they want to host you. So if you can make, these kinds of new conversations right now, this is a really great time to reach out to the Japanese, because you don't have to fly and they'll be much more open to accepting, like an online invitation. Another thing is that I ran a hybrid design sprint. So it was hybrid in two senses. One, it was Japanese and English. So we had an English speaking team and we had the Japanese speaking team. And it was online and offline. So it was hybrid in both those senses. And the English team was sitting there with their, so I don't know if you guys know, but if you've used it, but Google has like a camera translation. So if you hold up the camera, you know, and it can read and it translates the picture. And that's how they were collaborating. And I thought this would never have been possible if we were in the same room, because if you're writing like Post-its, like physical Post-its, you know, you would have to then translate word for word, but each person then went in and just highlighted the text and put it into Google or used their camera translation. And this was an absolute perfect way that we could use technology not to keep us apart, but to bring us together. So perfect question, Oscar. I loved it. Do we have another question?
Yes, we have another question from Daniela.
Dime.
Okay, so Daniela's asking, what role do leaders play when it comes to a culture that enhances innovation? Should education start with them, with leaders?
Yeah. Daniela, I love this conversation. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about. The most important thing when it comes to innovation is to become a learning organization. So exactly as you meant, like the about education, to become a learning organization is the first step in innovation. And a learning organization, particularly in a country like Japan, where business, there's no such thing really as work-life balance in Japan. Like work-life balance in Japan is like, my work life and my private life are equally good, right? So for example, that's why you get like, for example, I have clients saying, oh, I don't have time to chat this week, but this was pre-COVID, right? I don't have time to chat this week, but actually my daughter is running in her sports fair on Saturday. Maybe you'd like to join and we can talk there. And I'm like, no, thank you. You know, but this is how I think. So education is about becoming a learning organization. And when you have that kind of that deep connection between leadership and other people in an organization, like in Japan, leaders embodying an innovative mindset is essential to moving anything. So there's this kind of idea of a steak. So I don't know if also in Colombia you have like carne asada, if you also do that, like they do here in Mexico. Okay, so if you think about carne asada and you're like cooking a steak, often there's, you know, we think about that the top is usually well done, the bottom is usually well done, and it's the middle that's kind of still raw. This is very similar to innovation. Japanese, really like Japanese heads of organizations, like the C-suites, they are the ones that say to me, we want to change. Like one story that really like made my, you know, like kind of, you know, hair on the back of my neck stand up was I was working with a Japanese organization 400 years old. It's a 400-year-old organization, 400. And they said, hey, you know, can you come in? We want to do an ideation session because we don't really have, you know, very good ideas and we can't really innovate. And I thought, well, a 400-year-old organization sounds like probably they can innovate, you know? If you've been around 400 years, it sounds like you've been able to ride a few waves, right? So we went in and we started listening. And what you started hearing from the leadership was, I don't want to be the one to ruin our legacy. I have so much respect for what we've built. I'm so proud to be a part of this organization. I'm so proud that we've been around for 400 years. Then you start recognizing, interesting. We don't have an idea problem. We have a problem of, you know, like pride in a way, like organizational pride. So what this leadership team then needed to do was say, let's be really proud and really be really excited about what we've achieved. But let's also understand, in order for us to move to the next level, the next phase, what we then have to do is then become a learning organization. And how to do that means we need to think about new ways of approaching things. We need to think about partnerships in a new way. We have to think about our employees in a new way. We have to also think about our customers in a new way. So if we become a learning organization, then that's closer to becoming, you know, more innovative. Then we have the bottom of the steak, which tends to be, you know, like the foot soldiers, people kind of doing the work, the ones that have to speak directly to the customers. The times when the customer calls up the phone, you know, calls you and says, my order is wrong, or where's my food, or whatever it is. But then in the middle, the ones that don't necessarily have access to leadership and the ones that aren't necessarily accessing the customers. That's what's called the frozen middle, right? And what we want to do is to become an innovative organization is that we want to make sure that from the top to the bottom that people understand that an organization exists to learn. And that's really important. And that's, the absolute first step that we've seen in becoming a real innovative organization is through role modeling, right? So that means that leaders have to then not only say, yes, we believe in learning, but you have to then really see your CEO maybe taking a training on autonomous vehicles, or maybe they post about it either internally on the intranet, on your intranet, or maybe externally on LinkedIn, that they took a new training or something. So we have to really begin innovation with learning role modeling. Okay. I'm sorry. I sometimes feel like I'm the Latin one because I talk so much. I'll try to keep my answers shorter now because I see we're getting more questions.
Don't worry. There's a comment from Maria Alejandra. I don't know if it's not a question, but it's a comment. Francisco?
I think it is not that it isn't valued. It is not that they want to be alone. It's just that culture isn't so close to family as we are here, where family is the most important thing. Over their work is the most important thing. That's the perception I had when I lived that culture.
That's interesting. I wouldn't necessarily say that's the reason, like as in like the family thing. In Japan, there's this thing called like a nakama, which is like your internal circle and then your external circle. So for example, I speak Japanese fluently. At the beginning, when I used to say like, when I had the same level of Japanese as I do Spanish right now, right? Like, hola, soy Brittany, like, so, terrible. People would say, oh, wow, great, As I became fluent, and now that I run, design sprints and innovation workshops in Japanese, nobody ever says that anymore. So the closer that you get, the less kind of like they compliment you. So I don't necessarily think that Japanese aren't connected to family, because they are actually deeply, deeply connected to a group. And sometimes that group is work, sometimes that group is family. So that might be relevant in that way, as you said, like maybe it's not only family, because in Latin America, or I can speak for Mexico, because I have experience in Mexico, but I don't know what it's like in Colombia. But it's like you have your family, and if it's not your family, like that's it, right? Whereas in Japan, it's your work group. So for example, you would never say in front of a client that someone in your work group like did something wrong. Like you would never disagree internally in front of a client. Like that would just be like, oh my gosh, that would just be so shameful. So things like that.
Okay. Thanks, Maria Alejandra. So we have another question from Margarita. What do we have to learn from the Japanese culture here in Latin America?
One thing I would say, the first thing comes to mind is patience. So I think it's like here, it's like go like super fast. Again, I'm using Mexico as a comparison. I don't know about Colombia. This is Mexico what I'm talking about. But often I find Mexicans are very quick to start, right? Like, and there's this incredible passion, and there's like, yes, let's like get to it. But then 3 weeks in, you're like, ¿qué pasa con this project? And they're like, no sé, and then nobody knows kind of who's responsible anymore. Whereas Japan is that they're the opposite. They're like, nothing. And then once kind of the project is, that it has a little bit more body, it's a little bit more planned out, that's when everyone's on board. So I would say one thing is probably patience, to give things a little bit more time to develop. Understand that planting seeds means maybe you're going to have to wait a year, maybe 18 months, maybe even 24 months before you see anything come of it. So I would just say, I think one incredible thing about doing business in Latin America is this passion, this why not, por qué no, why not me? I think that's an incredible gift. I think that's an incredible spirit, but I would match that. Why not me? Why not now? Why not us? With poquito paciencia, no? So that's what I would say.
Okay. We have another one here from Camila Morales. Do you have any tips or suggestions or recommendations to build and develop an innovation culture? Taking into account that nowadays organizations are using like an old school model.
Yeah. That's a really great question, Camila. Thank you. The number one thing that I've learned when it comes to innovation is we have to take the intangible and make it tangible. Is anyone working here? Can you give me like just a show of hands? Is anyone here currently working in innovation? Just seeing some hands. Innovation. Okay. If we think about it, innovation is always like, what does that mean? And then the first question from clients is always, how long does it take? And what is it exactly? And can you send me the brochure? And you're like, well, it doesn't really exist and it depends. And that's the most annoying thing for a client when we say about innovation, oh, it depends. How long? It depends. How many people? It depends. You know, it depends on your problem. You know, it drives them crazy. So the number one thing when it comes to building an innovation culture is that you have to make the intangible tangible. So you've got a few things to do that. One, we have to verbalize our values, right? So that means you have to, instead of saying we're innovation, right? What you have to say is, we believe in learning in this organization. We believe in trying. We believe in helping others shine. We believe, and so you have to really give words, actual words to what your culture is. So really beginning with that values and that culture and giving them words to communicate. Because the way that we can share innovation is the same way we communicate, through words. And if I don't have the words, if I can't communicate what innovation means for us, for me, for our organization, to our clients, I don't have the tools that I need to be an innovator. So I'm waiting for our organization to help me communicate, give me the words, give me the vocabulary that I need to then go and share our innovation story, because that's innovation. Innovation has to be shared. We have to talk about it. One, about the values, right? Second thing is rituals. Rituals means that we have to develop routines around our innovation. So this means every Monday we do a check-in on what's going well in the organization and what's not going well. Another ritual would be something like, you know, for the first 10 days of a project, maybe you have a high level management stakeholder, you know, on your team to make sure that the project kind of, you know, really gets legs, you know, that it really, you know, runs well. So those two things if we think about it under that one umbrella, right? The one umbrella is make the intangible tangible. The two best ways to do that is through thinking about our values, right? Our values and rituals. How do we feel in this organization and how do we do that? I love that question.
Okie dokie. So I don't know if you are okay with just another question and we keep with the presentation and we'll
I am here for you guys.
Okay.
Whatever you guys like is what I'm here to do.
Okay. So
we wanted to ask questions and you want to say, what is it like being a foreign woman in Japan? We can talk about that too.
Okay. Thank you. So Camilo, if you want to share your question or you just want us to mention it.
Yes. From your experience working with people from Japan, so how much of innovation is inspiration and how much is hard work, like discipline or kind of?
That's a great question. That's a great question. Has anyone heard of the concept of Kaizen here? Kaizen is what's called continuous improvement, right? So there is always this kind of like balance between what's innovation and what's Kaizen, right? And so this is a really great question. Where does innovation come from? Is it hard work or is it inspiration? For me, innovation is 100% both. It's absolutely both. However, I think maybe what's interesting is what percentage of innovation is inspiration and what's hard work. Even though I'm an innovation professional, I believe that the innovation bit at the beginning is probably about 20%. That's why we can do like a design sprint, or we have these short-term kind of projects, or these kind of short-term workshops that help us set a blueprint, and then we go and execute on the blueprint. So it's like 20% kind of inspiration, innovation, and then the 80% is really that hard work. That's where we have to, implement things like agile. We have to, have project managers. We have to check in. We have to make sure it's done well. So I would say when it comes to innovation, both is really important, but make sure that you have your percentages right.
So
this is actually why I find Latin and Japanese teams work really well, because the Latin people come, and this is one thing, and if you allow me to speak as a non-Latin person, but the most innovative ideas I've seen have come from Latin America, and I have, I ran a business in Germany for 7 years. I'm Australian. I run a business in Japan, and the most innovative ideas, just the ideas, come from Latin America. No question, because Japanese people don't cross the road when there's a red light. They don't cross the road. They will not cross the road when there's a red light. They do not do it because it's red. So I have to trust it. Or if there's like a sign that says wait here, what do the Japanese people do? They wait. If you see a sign in Mexico that says wait here, what's the first thing people do? I'm going to go ask if that's really what I should do. I'm going to go ask and check if that's really the case. So in Latin America, you don't have this commitment or this trust of systems. So it helps you come up with ideas that Japanese people never thought of before, right? However, if you can then have like a Latin team to collaborate with the Japanese team on the innovation part, then have the Japanese execute, you've got a 10 out of 10 project team.
Nice. Interesting. So Valeria Quiteques asks, which is the first step in order to begin the change in a culture, in an organization culture?
Yeah, first step. First thing is understanding where we are, right? First thing, where do we have a leadership that is saying, I would love to change. I would love to see this, I would love to see this and this happen. But for some reason, it's not working for us. Or do we have a leadership that says, what do you mean? Everything's fine. So firstly, we've got to really understand what is the leadership kind of temperature? Are they, looking to change, or are they not? This is totally going to change your approach. Then once we kind of understand where we are, actually the first step is really beginning at the end. So let me ask you guys a question. If I say I'm going to go running, right? I'm going to go running for 30 minutes, right? If I go running for 30 minutes and then literally at 29 minutes and 59 seconds, I finish and I'm like, 30 minutes. I ran for 30 minutes. Good job. High five. How do you feel? You have like a decent level of, success. You're like, good job for me, right? Who else feels like that? After they said, I'm going to jog for 30 minutes, or I'm going to not anymore to the gym, but you're going to work out or something for 30 minutes or 1 hour and you do it. Do you usually feel good after achieving that goal? You feel good? So usually we feel good. If I were to say, let me go for a run until I'm tired, and this is usually how people begin their innovation projects. Let me go for a run until I'm tired. Imagine I actually am running for 3 hours, but because I never set myself an end goal, I don't give myself that feeling of success. And this is what we have to do for our innovation projects. Before we begin on an innovation journey, if we don't say after 1 week, 1 year, 5 years, whatever that end goal is, if we don't have that clear, you're never going to have that feeling of success. And as innovation professionals or as, project managers, if you cannot come back to your leadership and give them a success ticket, because you need the success ticket for your boss so they can give it to their boss, so they can give it to their boss and say, yes, it's worth, investing in this project, or it's worth investing in innovation, right? So what we have to do, the number one step is understand where we are. And then once we've understand where we are, let's really map what that looks like when we've succeeded. Always ask yourself, what is this going to look like when we've how do we know when we've succeeded, right? And that's usually giving ourselves an end goal. So, you know, it sounds like those two bookends. Understand, you know, day one where you are, but also make sure you set give myself, you know, an opportunity to succeed. Because again, in organizations, or, you know, if you're an entrepreneur, this is even true of your customers, you're really going to have to give them that if you can show them that you've succeeded, it builds that trust in you. And so the more trust that you have from your customers or from your leadership, it actually gives you more flexibility next time. So often your first innovation project, you're going to have someone over your shoulder. What's this? Why? Blah, 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 blah. But if you can give them that success ticket after the first project and say, look, you know, after 1 week or after 3 months, this is what we did. By the next project, they'll be like, oh, Maria or whoever did that really well. So I don't have to kind of micromanage it anymore. So for me, that's probably those two things to keep in mind.
Okie dokie. So Gerson is asking, which has been the biggest impact when you're developing an innovation culture?
The biggest impact when I'm
developing an innovation culture.
An innovation.
Or when you have developed an innovation culture in an organization.
Yeah. As in like a business case, or for me personally?
Preguntarle a Gerson ahí, Fran.
No, en el caso de ella, Francisco y Brittany, gracias.
Adiós.
In your
Okay.
case, personally.
In my case, see, I got that. That's about my Spanish. Yes. So for me, the thing that's for me the most impactful is when the innovation culture exists when we leave. For me, that is the absolute essential part. So when we see that the innovation culture, through building rituals and through building tangible values, when we see that that's embedded in everybody, so not just, you know, the upper leadership or the people working, on the floor, so to say, but if we really see everybody in the organization saying things like, so I'll give you one story that maybe makes this more clear. So in Japan, they're very risk averse. They don't like taking risks. Like I told you, I promise you, they don't cross the road when there's a red man. And it could be 2 o'clock in the morning. There's no one there. Even if you're super drunk on the way home, they wait, right? It's the craziest thing that you've ever seen. So if you keep this in mind, they're very risk averse people. And we had to develop this culture of we have to try, right? And we came up with this catchphrase called "do first," which means even though I have kind of reservations, even though I don't feel good, I'm just going to do it first, right? I'm going to just try. And that's what and then we developed this kind of do first initiative. And one day when I was walking through the halls, I walked past somebody who said, do first. And I was like, almost cried, you know what I mean? And so for me, that's like the moments for me that are the most impactful, when it's not like these big, huge projects, but it's when people's lives change. Because in Japan, I think we had a comment earlier, right? That the work is most important thing in Japan. That's not untrue. That's actually really quite true. In Japan, they spend a lot of time at work, right? Now it's different, like with home office and things like that, but they spend a lot of time at work. So if we think about, if we can improve somebody's experience at work, we therefore then improve the experience of their lives. And that is the stuff when I start thinking about our work is not only in innovation, our work is actually in empowering people at the workplace so they can live better lives. I think we've all had this. I think this is a human thing. I don't think this is cultural. If you've had a stressful day at work, you come home, this is pre-COVID, or even it's worse actually now in COVID. Imagine you've had a stressful day at work, you don't have the drive home or you don't have the train home, you just close your computer and your spouse or the person you're living with says, how was your day? And you're like, fine. You know what I mean? Like, fine. Whereas if we can encourage them that they don't have stress in their job, or they have healthy stress, that maybe when you sign off, and you go back to your family, that you can ask your spouse or the person you're living with, hey, how are you? What's going on? You could help your kids, with homework, because maybe you're not so stressed. So for me, the impact of seeing innovation on a daily level in like the normal workforce for me is the absolute path forward to really transforming not only our organizations, but really also our societies.
So, Lindsay, how you make organizations to understand that they are behind on the concept that everything is by hierarchy. It's the name.
Hierarchy.
Hierarchy. And they stay stuck in their ideas, and they don't leave that the members of the collaborators generate new proposals and new ideas.
Yeah, that's great. That's a really great point, and something that that we deal with. I actually don't think that the hierarchy in Japan is that different to the hierarchy in Latin America. Latin America also has a pretty strong hierarchy that I've recognized, but it's different. It's not the same as in Japan, but there's still that kind of, who knows who and that kind of stuff. So when it comes to this, the first thing that we have to remember is about user empathy, which means we have to begin with, instead of telling people that they're wrong or that they made a mistake, we have to approach it with a level of sensitivity, right? And so has anyone ever done anything and they've made a mistake and yourself, oh, that was a mistake, damn it. And then someone tells you that was a mistake. You're like, I know, thank you. And that, right? But you don't want people telling you. So this is one thing if you're in like change management, or if you're in digital transformation, or organizational transformation, or innovation, whatever your job is, we have to remember that maybe the person doesn't really want to be where they are, right? And they don't need us telling them, well, actually, if you look at the clock, especially in Japan, they're like 20 years behind on digital transformation. So the first thing I walk into a room and I say, okay, everybody, we're 20 years behind on digital transformation here, so we better get to work, right? The first thing they would say is, we're so late, why would I even bother now, So what we have to do is we have to build this excitement in the people for change. And that begins with empathy. So that begins with us not kind of like pointing fingers and saying, this is bad or whatever. Then once we kind of begin with this kind of like excitement for change, what we have to do is understand why systems exist. So the first thing in Japan that we have to do is we have to ask, why does this process look like it is, right? So the first thing that we do is we get them to map it. So we have them, in like either remotely, for example, like now, or pre-COVID, we have them, all the stakeholders in a room, all the hierarchy, and we say, map the process, right? And so they map out the process, how many times they have to do things. And then they themselves see, actually, we do this thing times. That's kind of stupid, right? But you don't actually have to say it. Instead of you telling them this is stupid because you do this thing 4 times, you actually give them the opportunity to help discover it themselves. I'm sure for anyone who's married, if you can make your spouse think it's their idea, like they're like, oh, and you're like, oh, what a good idea. What a good idea. So it's like that. It's like kind of like being married.
Okay,
so
Brittany,
help.
I agree with that 100%. So some of the students are also asking me if we could keep with the presentation, so they want to see the things that you prepared as well. So, and then we will back to questions.
You got it.
Okay.
So this is when we look at, if we look at the kinds of organizations that we need, right? This is the thing when it comes to leadership, and this is what I think is really interesting, is that most leaders, if we look at, for example, the Australian perspective, 87% of them say, yes, we need to elevate relationships with our customers. This is actually quite high. This is much lower in Japan, because Japan already really does give a lot of attention to customer relationships. Again, if we think about re-engineering our experiences, right, for technology. So if we look at this is interesting. This is the gap, right? So if we have here, for example, the Australians say 87%, and then the Japanese say 81%. So it's a little bit less, but because of the main focus of relationships, Japan, this is really a constant thing for Japan. This is not really something very new. However, this is actually very interesting, is that Japanese organizations really do have to become more human-centric, right? Which means that our processes, because Japanese processes are really built on on systems, on structures, on things, on technology, rather than on people, that this is actually going to be a really big change. And this is one thing that we see in our organization when we're supporting our clients, is that helping them move to become more human-centric is an opportunity not only for them to create a better to create a better experience for their customers, but also for their employees. So again, this is kind of more global data that we can see how people are reacting, for example, to data privacy, tracking, things like that. But this, for example, now let's start getting into like the AI stuff, right? Which is a reimagining business through human and AI collaboration. This is, for example, where people are saying if we look at, for example, if we look at Australia has a very low population. We have a huge land mass, right? However, Japan has a small land mass and they have, many more people, but their population is getting older. So in both countries, we need AI. One in Australia, because we simply don't have the hands. We just don't have the people to get things done. So in Australia, there's 24 million people in the entire country, 24. So I think there's like 25 million in Mexico City, for example, like just to give you an idea of, like population. And this, for example, if we see like 85% of Australian organizations are really saying, okay, AI is really something that we're going to have to start piloting or adopting. And Japanese companies are also saying the same thing. However, the Japanese organizations, this data was taken this year. What I think is that Japanese organizations will see over the next kind of 3 to 5 years. We often see in a crisis, for example, like world wars, or for example, in 2011, I don't know if you guys remember the Japanese earthquake. Japan uses crisis to really just grow. So this year, 2020, probably 2021, and probably the first 6 months of 2021, Japan will be very quiet. And then at the end of 2021, 2022, you'll start hearing things in the news like, Japan has experienced record growth, or Japan is the first country to pilot AI and this, because they spend times of crisis preparing, right? So if we look at this, if we think about, humans and machines, what's kind of like what what management is saying. One of the reasons why I founded the Business Karaoke podcast, so if anyone is interested on doing business in Japan, we have a podcast on doing business in Japan, is because data or media used to say, Japan doesn't like to change. Japan doesn't want to change. But every day I hear clients saying, we want to change. We don't know how. We want to develop new business. We want to go abroad. We want foreign partners. And then I had this media saying that that's not what Japan wants, but I had Japan saying that's exactly what we want. And one of the reasons why we had the podcast is exactly because of this. 81% of Japanese executives say we want to collaborate. We want to do new things. And this, for example, is very interesting. So if we look at this, if we look at 32% of Australian organizations think about design or human-centric, right? Which is doing things like user empathy, testing, iteration, things like that. But then we have a little bit more of a growth, for example, with Japan, that they say, yes, this is also something that we need. If we look here, that Australian organizations are actually behind the global curve when it comes to collaborative, interactive, or AI systems, really. And I would imagine simply because we simply, or in Australia, we just don't have the workforce or the talent yet. Whereas in Japan, it's very similar. Japan, ironically, I think most people have this idea that Japan is like this super like tech powerhouse, right? That you walk around, there's like neon lights everywhere. That's true. But you can go to a restaurant and have a bill for like $300 and be like, I'd like to pay with card, please. And they're like, no, we don't take cards. You're like, what? Don't take cards. You can be in Mexico and you can buy something at the Oxxo for like 20 pesos and you're like, con tarjeta, por favor. No problem. Boom. And you're like, what? How is that possible? But Japan is so actually behind in many ways. People often think that there's this, if we think about customer experience versus customer service. So customer service, Japan is like king. They will go above and beyond to make you happy. But when it comes to customer experience or user experience, they're very behind. So if we think about, smart things, so about customers and the kind of products and who owns them. So if we think about, what kind of changes are coming. So Japan doesn't like changes. Australia's a little bit more open to change, as we see more or less like the global average when it comes to, what kind of connected products we'll have. They're about 76. Japan say that they will have more updates over the next 3 years, but, we'll certainly see. If we then think about Australian organizations, this for me is the interesting gap. So if we look here, we have 47% of Australian organizations saying that customers, are open to change, especially like software updates, things like that. But then if we look here, this is a significant jump of like 62%. I would say this is probably for one of the reasons. One reason is I don't think they asked their customers. I think they just, I'm pretty sure if they just asked, are our customers okay with all these updates that we do? Yeah, I'm pretty sure. So if we think about this, the Japanese organizations thinking that the customers are generally okay with something, let's also not forget the data at the beginning being that they lack centricity. So probably they didn't ask their customers. They just probably guessed it themselves. So if we think about robots, right? What kind of role robots are playing? This is where we see Australian executives, which are below the global average, believe in like robots will be able to, change the world. Whereas Japan is much more open to robots. I'm not sure if you guys have seen they have robot dogs, things like that in Japan. Like people, I'm serious guys, people have pet robots. They're like, this is my dog. And it's an actual robot, and so for example, I think it's called the Amiibo, but even think about things like, a Roomba, which is like the vacuum cleaners, things like that. That's like all home devices. But Japan is not only gearing up, they're really setting up to make sure that robots can really lead in their businesses in the future. And then if we think about 5G, so 5G is actually a really in conversation in Japan because lots of their telecommunication systems are actually outdated. So they kind of missed, I would say, the 2000 to 2015 development period of technology and telecommunications. Japan completely missed. So their opportunity right now is actually that they can kind of go from kind of like a 3G world. They never kind of really got on 4G, and they can kind of skip that and go to 5G. So for example, this is then Australia is a little bit more, they're not as convinced that 5G will change as much as the Japanese. The Japanese are saying, yes, 5G are really going to help us grow not only as a business, but also as a country. So Australians here have more or less a global average, more or less, a little bit less, but not too different, that they believe that their employees will be, they think half their employees are going to be okay, half won't, right? Whereas Japan have a deeper commitment that they think, yes, we don't think that we'll have that many employees kind of facing these challenges. Another maybe one of these reasons is because when a Japanese company, decides to do something, particularly around technology, that they really go from top to bottom. They make sure that we have, education programs and that everyone is kind of on board. For example, if we think about, or even the issues, right, the concerns, Australia and Japan are kind of like on par when it comes to concerns about robots. But certainly, the world is still split. Japan is certainly pro-robot, but then we also see globally that people are not too excited about it. But this is, for example, now we get to talk about one of my favorite parts, which is the innovation DNA, right? Innovation DNA is how do we create that engine for innovative organizations? So that's not only the products and services, but also the people behind the products and services. So 49% of Australians say, yes, we're going to see lots of changes. 79% of Japanese say we're going to see a lot of changes. And is that because Japan is actually super advanced? No, it's actually because Japan has kind of spent the last 15 years not really seeing that much technology. Maybe, we might be in similar age brackets, you and I. Do you guys remember when you used to have all these things that came out of Japan, like CD players or, music devices and things like that? Do you remember that? And then there's been 15 years where we haven't seen anything from Japan. I really hope to see that kind of, that 80s, 90s Japan that was a little bit more excited, a little bit more, took a little more risk. I really hope to see that again because it exists. There's a reason that Toyota, Mitsubishi, Honda, Mazda, all these huge Japanese companies exist. It's because, there's Japanese people stood up one day and, they were Japanese entrepreneurs and they said, yeah, we're going to bring something valuable to the global market. So I really hope over the next, 5 to 10 years, we kind of see that Japan come back because I think after, all the wealth that they created in the 80s, they kind of got a little lazy. They were like, let's not take too many risks. Everything's okay. But now everything's not okay in Japan. They're losing people. The economy is not growing. So that's why we have this number compared to 49% of Australians. 79 are saying, gosh, if we don't do something, we're going to be in trouble. So again, this is also something that we see that the 76% of Japanese are saying the stakes have never been higher. This is from a country that have lost 2 world wars. And they're still, the stakes for innovation have never been higher, right? So we have Australian executives believing that, as when it comes to, for example, issues surrounding the environment, which is so important, 73% of Australians are saying, yes, this is really important to us. And this is also kind of new in Japan that, again, Japan being so close to the environment, like tsunami is a Japanese word, typhoon is a Japanese word. Japan is plagued by earthquakes. This is a country that knows, and they're an island, right? So if they don't take global warming seriously, that they're going to have some problems as well. So this is kind of a little bit like if we think about in the future, what are the kind of challenges that we're facing? Australia says energy, sustainable development, climate change. Japan says sustainable development, energy, health, and wellness. And this is not surprising if we think about their aging population. They have to keep people healthy. And they have to obviously do a lot of investment in preventative health, right? Because they can't just have, this aging population and then, paying for everyone's medical bills. They're really going to have to think about how can we solve issues of disease earlier. So what does that tell us? It tells us that on the right-hand side, this is actually interesting. The first 2 kanji mean crisis, and the kanji 2 and 3 mean opportunity. So it really embodies that idea that there is opportunity in crisis. So what are we trying to do here, right? So we need to basically take companies from this kind of traditional strategy to an adaptive strategy. So this means instead of us having one goal and that's it, the thing that we want to do here is we want to map multiple futures. We want to see different opportunities. We want to make sure that when we're kind of like placing our bets, right? When we're betting on something, we want to make sure that we have good options. It's the same thing if you're hiring someone for a position and only one person shows up, well, you kind of have to take that person. Whereas if you have 10 people show up for that job, you can take the best person. And this is the same thing that we want to do with strategy. We want to make sure that we don't have to just implement the strategy we have simply because we have it. We want to implement the strategy that's going to be the most effective for our business. So this is one of the reasons why we use co-creation methodologies like design thinking. So if we think about the business case behind design thinking, so design thinking helps us create new business opportunities because we get different stakeholders in the room and we see things differently. We also have more efficient operations. This is absolutely essential for small companies, large companies. We have to make sure that the operations, that what we're doing, that we do it the best way that we possibly can. If we're thinking about gaining future investment, if you're an innovation professional or if you are working in transformation, you are going to, the number one question that you're constantly going to have is, how am I going to help my customers afford this, right? Maybe your customers are internal, maybe your customers are external, but we want to make sure that people can afford this transformation, right? So that's the why we do it in sprints. We do it in short sprints so that we help clients get a success story. Maybe we get a sale for them so that they can then use that money to invest again. We also see deeper customer relationships. Working with someone, there's no better way to get to know someone than working with them. And this is one of those things about design thinking. It's not that I do my part and I hand it over to you and then you hand it back to me. Design thinking is that we do it together, and doing something together is really one of the best ways to develop relationships. And if we think about organizational culture change, organizational culture change is essential not only for Australian businesses, but especially for Japanese businesses, because it's not only going to help their internal talent that are currently with them, but they're also it's also about hiring world-class talent. So for example, some companies in Japan still don't have maternity leave. Why would you possibly think in 2020 that a father or an expecting father or mother, with high talent would ever join your organization, So this here is called the double diamond, right? So this is kind of what the design thinking process is. Let me ask you guys a question. I'm going to stop sharing for 1 second because I'd like to see your faces. Have you ever been in a situation where someone's like, let's think of ideas. What about this idea? And we need new ideas. And you go, okay, well, let's think of some ideas. Okay. What about this idea? And the person says, or your boss, or whoever it is, says, no, it's too expensive. And you say, okay, what about this idea? And they say, no, it takes too much time. You go, okay, what about this idea? And they say, no, we tried that back in, 1998 and it didn't work. So we're not doing it anymore. And you go, I thought you were asking me for ideas, and you just keep saying no. Has anyone been in this situation? Can you put your hand up? Okay. Thank you for your hands. I appreciate it, seeing the hands. Let me ask this. This one happens a lot in Latin America. We decide we're in a meeting for 1 hour, and for 55 minutes, we talk about it. Yes, let's do it. Yes, that idea. Great, great, great. We're all aligned. Let's do A. And then 5 minutes before we leave, someone says, me gusta B. I like B. Can we go back to the beginning? You go, we're supposed to be done, and you want to have this conversation all over again. Has anyone been in that situation? I love seeing those hands. Thank you. So in both situations, we have a communication problem. Whether the communication is someone saying no, or whether the communication problem is someone throwing new ideas, it's a communication problem. So if you want to, and this you can immediately implement in your organization, it doesn't even have to be Japanese, we need to implement divergent and convergent conversations. Divergent conversations is when you open ideas, open data, anything goes, any ideas is okay. So this is, for example, during the discovery phase, you can't have someone saying, no tengo tiempo, no tengo dinero, whatever. You can't have that. You have just someone saying, you just have to just listen to ideas. Once we've set the time and we say, okay, we're done with thinking about ideas, now we're going to go deeper into synthesis, into understanding, into choices. That's when, if somebody comes and says, oh, I have a new idea, you say, no, you have to wait, because we're not in a divergent phase right now. So if you can implement this in your conversations, divergent, convergence, I promise you they're going to go so much faster. And a reason is, when somebody is telling you no, right, and you have a new idea, and someone is telling you no, it's not because they hate you, it's not because they hate the idea, it's because they honestly have concerns. Maybe it's their money you're spending, maybe they're the finance person, so you have to convince them. So they're not saying it to you because they they don't want to be fun, they're doing it because they have to be responsible. But if we don't take the time to diverge, if we don't take the time to create good ideas, then we won't be able to make a very good decision. So the design thinking process is all about this divergence and convergence. And the first diamond, you can see doing the right thing, is when we understand the problem, where we research, we analyze, and we synthesize, right? Once we've gone through understanding the problem, which is kind of when people ask, what do we do in an innovation project? It's that first diamond. It's all about that first diamond, which is understanding where we are, right? And then the second diamond that's when we come with ideas, right? So if you're an innovation professional and you're helping an organization, become more innovative, you don't need to, on the first day, bring ideas. On the first day, we need to do things like research. We have to analyze. And then after that, that's when we synthesize. And then only after that, do we come with ideas that we can build prototypes and things like that. So the design thinking phase is often in a line, but I like to have it in kind of like a circle, because at the end of the day, it's really a never-ending process. We want to begin with the user need. We want to understand what that need is, create an idea on that need, prototype it as fast as we can, test it as fast as we can so that we can bring it to market. So those 5 steps. But then I want to leave you with this last question, which is, where do good ideas come from? If we look at the design thinking process, that idea is in the middle. Often we think about good ideas, whether it's for an organization or whether it's for a startup, comes from the middle. I believe good ideas start from empathizing, comes from the first area, right? Which is that deeply understanding the customer. So instead of walking into like a Japanese organization or Australian organization and saying, okay, guys, we should do AI, right? What we need to do is we have to walk in and say, oh, let me develop empathy for this customer, their business, and why they can't change so easily. Maybe for example, it's a food and beverage company. It's incredibly difficult to get new products onto the market, legally, right? With all of the laws and regulations. So when it comes to, good ideas and innovation, it doesn't come from ideation. It comes from deeply empathizing with your customer and where they are. So
Brittany,
yeah.
I think there's a question that it's related to that. Sorry to interrupt.
Sure. No, go for it.
Gerson is asking. Okay, sorry. It's the ways of discovering insights in both cultures are the same, or do you find a difference between the closed culture of Japan versus the open, into brackets?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a super great question. So the process is the same, right? But we have to be very thoughtful with what method we use, right? So the process of, empathizing is the same, but we have to think about what's going to be appropriate. So for example, I find, for example, like interviewing somebody is not always the best way to find out what their behavior is. So for example, if you were to ask someone like, how much money do you spend, a week on like useless things? You'd be like, oh, never, like nothing, but then actually, if you were to then, like, for example, take bank statements, and then you could actually highlight what was this, then you actually recognize, oh gosh, what I'm saying isn't really true. So in Japan, observation is a really great tool rather than in Australia. Australians talk a lot. They talk a lot. So, but in Japan, not as much. So in Japan, I would really encourage like observation. Also, diaries are really great in Japan. If you're doing like an organizational transformation, have the employees write a diary rather than, for example, doing an interview. Because this will be the interview if you do an interview in Japan. How's everything at your company? Fine, thank you. How's your relationship with your boss? Fine, thank you. How's the relationship with your team? Fine, thank you. So, but if you give them like a pen and paper and say, write down, your feelings during the day, no one else is going to see it. It's just going to be me. Your boss isn't going to see it. No team member is going to see it. And then tell me how you feel. You'll get like you'll get a lot of data. So that's a really great question. Thank you.
Okay.
Which is good because really at the end, this is more or less what I wanted to share with you guys. It's about the process, about those 5 steps. And maybe the one thing that I'd like to also just and here before we can go back to questions is that, ideation needs structure. Ideation is absolutely essential for structure. Often people think, oh, ideas are, let's just, think of a good idea and then, kind of like, hope that it's a good idea. No, it's not about being in the shower and having that like aha moment. Sometimes ideas take structure. Sometimes they take hard work. So if you look at this, it's filled with ideas. But if you see on the left-hand side, there's enablers. On the top, there's, these kind of questions. So ideation is not like, oh, gee, let me have a good idea. No, give yourself structure so we can help you to succeed. And also certainly go to prototyping is really important, and then testing. So that is the design thinking process. And that is, so I just wanted to kind of like get to the end of the slide so you guys see that is where you can contact me. And now it is completely over to you, and it is 100% your show. Anything you want to know.
Okie dokie. So Fran, just helping with some of the questions. I think we were on.
We did Gerson's. We have one from Susan.
Yes.
Just tell me which one and I'll do it.
Let's go with, yeah, with that one that you mentioned.
Okay, Brittany, we have a question from Susan. In your experience working in a culture where they avoid failure and they want everything to be perfect, what strategies do you recommend to face organizations that have similar cultures or that are afraid of failing?
Yeah. Did you see my face when you asked the question? Oh, yes. Because this is so real. So Susan, incredible question. The number one thing is that this is not something, this fear of failure is not something we're ever going to really be able to change. So what do? We have to think about it like a muscle. So we have to build the muscle. So what does that mean? We have to think about ways that we can help the organization experience, instead of maybe failure, using words like learning, because I don't think anyone really wants to fail. People want to learn, but I don't think anyone wants to fail. So we have to help the organization build resilience. And the way that we can help them build resilience is by literally thinking about it like that it's a skill set. And if you think about innovation and failure as a skill set, instead of like it just being like talent, oh, okay, well, you're risk averse, so, no. Or, I think a Mexican lawyer or a Colombian lawyer would have more in common with a Japanese lawyer than like a Japanese marketer, because they think the same. They're the same kind of person. It's not only culture, right? So what we have to do here is we have to find ways in which they can build their resilience muscle, their innovation muscle. And this is where you have to think as an innovation professional, as a transformational professional, whatever it is that you do, you have to go in and think, what's the best way for me to start? So for example, maybe you can start very simply, right? By having, on Mondays at lunchtime, maybe it's online, maybe it's offline, that you invite people from the organization to share new projects, but you don't share like if they've failed or not failed. You just share, oh, it's simply, we're just sharing new things. And by doing that, you show the organization it's not only about the result. It's not only about if it succeeds or doesn't succeed. It's about the journey, right? So if you can find ways for the organization to build their muscle and help them, see that the failure is not the goal, learning is the goal. If you can help to, getting back to that really question that we got really at the beginning was, what do? It's really becoming a learning organization. So finding ways for the organization to celebrate learning is really going to be key. Great question.
Okay. Shall we go with the Mariana's question about recognition, Fran?
Mariana?
Mariana, yeah. Below Susan.
Okay, I got it here. How unavoidable is it to have recognition in order to drive innovation? And what kind of recognition is the most advisable?
Great question. Recognition is really important. It's really important for really for many things, but especially for innovation. Recognition in Japan, if you recognize one person, that's going to be terrible, because the one person is going to think like, oh, no, like it wasn't only me, it was my team. Like if you think about like tennis, I'm trying to think about football. Let's think about football. This is a really good like Japan, like Latin America analogy. If a football team in Latin America wins, often they're like interview like Messi. They're like, oh yeah, and he's like, yeah, and we all tried hard, whatever. But the Japanese are like, we're able to achieve this goal because of everyone who supported us, and you know what I mean, like even the speech is like very different. So when it comes to recognition in Japan, recognize the team, recognize the effort. I wouldn't recommend highlighting individuals, right? If you're the external, I wouldn't recommend that. One thing that does work if you wanted to like highlight individuals Japan is having the team themselves highlight an individual. That can work. In Australia, so over the last 3 years, we worked with an organization. We trained, over 2,000 of their consultants, and we did research on essentially what Japanese people like in a company, right? And we had a look at over 2,000 journey maps. Can you imagine 2,000, employee journey maps? There's a lot of journey maps. And the high point of a Japanese journey map was when they had just overcome a very, very hard time in their lives, like this kind of and then they did it, right? It's this kind of like samurai moment, right? But then the deepest point of their journey was two things. They either felt alone or they were alone. So they were either put in a team of one person, like they were the only team, or they felt alone, like they felt isolated, right? Whereas like a Western kind of mindset that I saw in Europe was more like the high point was when I was recognized individually for my skill. Good for me, right? But then the absolute down point of like these kind of like European journey maps was when I wasn't able to use my skill. So if I'm a lawyer and I had to like work for 6 months in marketing or something, like that's the worst possible thing that could happen, because it's like, it's my talent going to waste, Whereas like Japan is like their lowest is they just don't like being alone, which is so funny. But they love this kind of, we overcame like a really hard thing together.
Okie dokie. So the next one is from Luz Estela. How to achieve that the innovation culture would be
a puzzle.
A puzzle built by all the business or all the organization, and not just by one area or one department or one team.
Okay. The reason why I know the word rompecabezas is because in the first week of quarantine, that was what I started searching on Amazon. Rompecabezas. How this is the way, so this is we need to take a two-tier approach to this. It's going to be essential that we have a team that leads innovation, right? But then this team has to then be responsible for replicating or for building what's called champions. Because as you said, imagine if it only stays as one team or one people, the rest of the organization doesn't benefit. So what we want to see is that everyone feels involved. Another terrible thing that can happen in Japan is that people think, the innovation team is doing it. I don't have to worry about it. It's not my problem. It's their problem. So what we want to do is that we want to have a team, right? A team that leads innovation or that leads change. But this team cannot be a team of like divas. You know what I mean? Like, we're like the special ones. This team actually has to be cheerleaders, not divas. Sometimes we see like the designers and the innovation people getting like a diva. No, you're a cheerleader, which means you have to go and support other people. Even if it's something very small, like Tanaka-san says, this, project, the client, that's great, Tanaka-san, instead of saying, I could have done it better or something. So what we want to do is have a team, a core team that drives the innovation, the innovation story in the organization, but also this team has to go to other parts of the organization and invite people to their innovation party. It's like a party. You have to go to the factories and say, hey, we're doing innovation. Come, let's do this thing, or let's go to the factory floors and bring innovation there, or go to marketing, or go to finance. Don't just stay in your innovation room and then send an email. Hello, everyone. If you would like to know more about innovation, then come to our special innovation room. No, you have to say, tell me where you are. If you want to know about innovation, I'm going to come to you. That's probably how I do it.
Okay. So we have a question from Maria Margarita, I think. I understand that the Japanese market is super dynamic and competitive. What factors has this market or the culture that drives that need for constant innovation?
You mean people, right? Do you mean people, like the people are competitive?
Yeah, the market, the Japanese market.
But like the people, the people. Or the businesses?
The businesses. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if that.
Oh, both of them.
She's saying both.
Okay. Let me tell you individually first. when I went to high school in Japan. You know what happens when you get your grades, right? There's like, this is what happens. 1, 2. You go to your classroom, and then on your classroom door is this, which is everybody's name and their grade on your classroom door. So you know who was first, and you also know who was last. Can you imagine that? I don't know if that's how you do it in Latin America,
Yeah,
but
it's something
that's how
like here.
it's.
We
You
do
do,
it-
yeah. So you
we
have
used to
this,
do that
right?
here. Sorry.
And you like turn up, and then you're like, there's your name, right? Whereas like, I'm from Australia, which is this kind of more, like everybody learns in their own time, in their own way, like kind of culture, right? So the Japanese are very competitive in that sense, but it's what people perceive as competitive in people is actually in Japan what's called gambaru, right? And gambaru is this idea of trying hard. And the reason why you try hard is actually not individual competitiveness. It's not that I want to compete, so I'm good. Actually, the competitiveness in Japan is more about I want to try hard so the group views me as a valuable team member. That's more the thinking, which is kind of like crazy, because if you see competitiveness, it's usually individualistic. No, in Japan, trying hard is so that I can try hard for the sake of the group. When it comes to Japanese businesses being competitive, I have to be very honest. Japanese businesses are often, supported by subsidies, and they're often a part of very larger holding groups. So I think that my opinion is Japanese businesses aren't as competitive as they probably should be. But certainly, I hope that I at least could explain a little bit of the individual competitiveness.
Okay, so we have another question here from Alexandra. Why there are so many ideas that are not executed in Latin America? It's a discipline problem, culture, fear, or a lack of leadership?
So I'm not the Latin American expert. However, I am on the call. I'm on a call with 56 Latin American experts. So if somebody would like to step in here, then feel free, go ahead. The only thing that maybe that I could say is a little bit different is that there's incredible ideas in Latin America. I would love to see more maybe like a long-term vision, and then the patience to then see it through. But I think all these factors are really important. Like I think not having like consistent organizational support is very difficult, because in Latin America everything is kind of like relationship based. I don't know what it's like in Colombia, but like in Mexico, if you go somewhere, if it gets done or not depends really on if the person likes you or not. And you're like, well, that shouldn't be the case. It's just your job. You should just do it, But like in Mexico, if they don't like you, they'll like make you wait and stuff like that, So I would say that the only thing that I don't see as strong in Latin America as I do in Japan would certainly be that consistent leadership through the length of the project. I think if we can work on that, having consistent support and leadership that's not kind of varying, because you'll have a leader might say yes one day and then no the next day. We kind of need a little bit more commitment in people's word. Like in Japan, like they really, like, the samurai spirit does still exist. Like if there's like a Toyota scandal, like that they found out that they were lying or something like that, like the CEO has to go and basically do this whole like ceremony of like bowing, and it's like the closest thing of modern day kitty, which is like where they samurais used to like cut their stomach and whatever on the war field. It's the closest thing imaginable. So I would just say if we can work maybe on the execution through leadership, through maybe like a more of a coherent plan could help, but not sure.
Okay, we have a question from Ariel. Ariel, I don't know if you want to propose the question or mention the question. Ariel, are you there?
So it's about, because it's in English, so I can read it. It's about the joint venture between Nintendo and
Universal.
And universal. Okay. And these were the one huge impact to make to it. So I hope that these kinds of collaborations will be how Japan leads in the future. I don't think, Japan has never been like the first mover. It's never been like kind of like the States or somewhere that they've come with like new things, or like Germany, they come with new things. Japan has always been very good in Kaizen, which is that continuous improvement. So I think if Japan can use what they have as their very strong old existing systems through new investments, I think this is going to be a really great. So one example, for example, as you mentioned, Ariel, gracias, your Nintendo and Universal collaboration. Another collaboration, for example, it's still too early to tell if it's successful or not, is the SoftBank WeWork. So SoftBank is like one of the largest telecommunications companies in Japan. They invested in WeWork. Even though we're all quarantined right now, I'm sure that, co-working or remote working or places to remote work are going to have to come back, because I don't think people enjoy only working from home. I think, having these little boxes or something to go to, I think people, would enjoy. So if we can use these kinds of larger Japanese organizations to fast forward or to really accelerate the growth of startups or potential unicorns in other countries, I think this is really going to be the way forward, not only for Japan to be a global competitor, but I also think it's a great opportunity for global organizations to gain capital from an investor who is not looking for a return on their investment in the next 3 months. Let's think about this. Do you guys have WeWork in Colombia? Yes?
Yes.
They're all closed, right? They're all done. They're all closed, right? Is it the same? Because they're all closed in Mexico. Are they closed in Colombia as well?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. SoftBank has not pulled their investment from WeWork. You would think, oh my gosh, the Japanese are so stupid. They invested in WeWork and then there was the pandemic and then now they've lost all their money. Do you think the Japanese ran to the bank, pulled out their money and left? No. The Japanese are long-term investors. So they're actually a really great investor if you really are wanting to build something big, because even if a pandemic comes and something like WeWork, like this is crazy, guys. Like imagine you make an investment in WeWork, a pandemic hits and everything closes and you have to sit on your investment 10 years, 20 years, maybe 50 years. But the Japanese companies are okay with that. And so I think these kinds of collaborations are not only good for Japan, I also think they're good for the global market, because you get a little bit more, freedom. Like if you're an AI or you're a health company, maybe you need 20 years to build something. Maybe you need that long-term investor, and Japan is that perfect investor.
Yeah, they already did it here with Rappi, which they invest like $1 billion. And Rappi is like the unicorn of Colombia. We just have 2 unicorns, and that's one of them. So yeah. So we have another question here from Susan. How's the communications in the Japanese enterprises? Are all of the people have the right to participate and push the innovation projects, or it's different?
Oh boy. This is actually really interesting. So if you remember, for example, one of the slides that I showed you was a slide of like 12 Japanese old men, right? This company actually, and I was the only woman in the room. This company actually said, we don't really know how we got like this. Honestly, we don't really know how we got like this, but we don't want to stay like this. Can you help us? So you'll have some organizations that tend to be very, very hierarchical, super hierarchical. Funnily enough, and this conversation just stays between you, I, and the internet, I believe that foreign organizations in Japan are more hierarchical than Japanese organizations themselves. So I'll give you an example. So think about like a big American bank, for example, in Japan, is much more hierarchical than, for example, like Mitsubishi Bank. I don't know why, but because the Japanese organizations have a deep commitment to the people. So for example, if you get sick, your company pays your kids' school fees, stuff like do you think an American company is paying the school fees of like their foreign subsidiaries employees? I don't think so, So when we start looking at, and so because of that kind of like less of a commitment to people in foreign driven organizations in Japan, we see that the communication tends to be much more harsh. People tend to have much more clearer roles. And that's where the hierarchy comes from. Whereas larger organizations, for example, like Nissan, right? Nissan's CEO escaped in a box at the end of last year. Guys, did you hear about this? Like Nissan CEO escaped in a box. It was the craziest thing. So Nissan had, a lot of problems with their French CEO. And now, for example, they have a new CEO coming in that has to kind of do this massive cleanup. Nissan has not only lost many points in their share price, but they've also lost a lot of talent. So this new Japanese CEO is much more of the CEO that we kind of see in Japan, which is he's coming in and saying, okay, we have to rebuild. And so for me, this kind of CEO of Japan is much more representative of the Japan that we see today, rather than that kind of like older hierarchical mindset. The hierarchical mindset tends to be a little bit more in the middle management than the leaders themselves.
Okay. And Fran, could you help me with the Monica's question? Monica Beltran?
Sure. Does the innovation culture, is it enhanced through activities aimed at all the collaborators, or through specific projects, innovation projects in product, service, etc.?
That's a great question. And I think the answer is both. I think one of the best ways that we can see innovation is not only through very clear, concrete business cases, like building products, building services, but then also getting stakeholders involved at any point that we can. And even just, again, getting back to being that learning organization. How can we, how might we be able to live what we say, right? Which is, how might we be able to show employees that we not only say being a learning organization is important, how might we be able to really show them? So for example, if we say learning is important to us, and then you say to your boss, hey, I've got this, I think this training would be really helpful for me for my job. And they say, no, sorry, we won't give you the budget, right? So for example, making sure that what you say and what you do is in alignment is going to be really important. And as you said, in your question, I think really both really play a role.
Okay, so Pacho, do you want to make the question? Francisco, are you there?
Yes. Here.
Okay.
Okay. Well, in the chat is my question here is in contrast to the Asian culture, and I appreciate the patience, calm, and they have the ability to wait the lifetime cycles. We in Latin America, we have done. We're planning at the short time. We have the plans short times. We're thinking very fast to the change. Suppose design thinking talk about to be design thinking about the user and adapt very fast. But how can we adapt both at the same time for the best way to planning and design thinking?
Yeah, I think that's a great point that, often we have to be realistic. One of the reasons why Japan can plan long-term is because they have long-term cash reserves. They're big believers in having essentially, really large resources, for kind of a rainy day. So for example, right now during the coronavirus, no one's been fired in Japan. No one. Because they know bad times come, so they have these resources. Whereas in Latin America, we have to be very honest and say not all organizations are built to withstand long-term, crises. Also, let's even look at like on a personal, level. Like I heard, for example, something like in the States, I think in the United States, that the average person has $200 worth of savings. Or for example, like in Latin America, maybe that number is different again. So we have to look at, be realistic and say, okay, where are we? And I think design thinking, as you said, Francisco, that design thinking helps us plan in a short sprint. And I think design thinking is actually, is really useful in the Latin American context, because it's focused on stakeholder management as well. You know, and in Latin America, you know, it's very important that, you know, there's relationships and people know kind of like what's going on and, you know, things like that. So if we can use design thinking to not only manage stakeholder relationships, but then also gain alignment and then also plan, then maybe that actually might be the key to finding that kind of longer term support that you'll need to run those like longer term projects. So if we have like a design sprint, for example, you know, in a week, and we say, okay, this is what our project is going to look like, and you build, for example, a roadmap for 6 months, then maybe in that roadmap, you might cover things like who's going to be responsible, where's our budget coming from, and having answered these questions in your design sprint or, you know, through a design thinking workshop really might help you achieve that that goal of, you know, making sure that we see that project, you know, to longevity, really. Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Okay. We have another one from Oscar Campino. How to promote the empathy on organizational cultures that they don't have it in their corporate values?
Well, I think the answers in the questions, right? We have to begin with the values. And if we say, okay, how might we create empathy as a value, right? It might be something like, how might we listen, you know, before we talk, things like that. And then once we kind of build empathy into a value, the most important thing is that values don't stay on a sheet of paper or stay on a company website. The most important thing is that values are lived, right? That they're lived, they're enjoyed, they're, you know, that people breathe them, they love them. So if we can find a way to help the organization take this idea of empathy, right? Because it's like empathy, what does that mean? Innovation, what does that mean? You know, if we can help make that look like a situation, like look like a ritual, that's going to be really helpful. So for example, if we say in our organization, empathy is really important, right? You think, yeah, okay, good. But then, for example, you're at a meeting and everyone's talking at once. And you're like, I don't think anyone's really trying to understand what the other person is having to say here. So if you have, for example, like empathy as a value, maybe you can then say, okay, let's create, you know, like a basic ritual for empathy, which means one conversation at a time. So in our next meeting, one conversation at a time means only one person speaks instead of people, you know, speaking, you know, on top of each other. But that's a really great point. How do you create those values and those rituals in an organization that it doesn't exist? And for me, it's really just looking at the organization and appreciating the maturity of the organization and the leadership commitment, and wondering, do we have to do this in small steps, or do we have the support that we can go and make a giant leap?
Super. Thank you, Brittany. Frank, could you help me with the Alexandra's comment and question about the Y theory and Z theory?
Americans created Y theory and Z theory. But the Japanese were the ones who applied it the best, where they promoted the sense of belonging of the employee towards the company. Is this concept still being applied, or has it changed with the new changes that have been seen in organizations at a worldwide level?
Yeah, that's a really great point. Thank you for your question. And also, I should also say at this point, thank you to Francisco for translating everything for me. The reason maybe why Japan was able to implement that better, even though they didn't create it, was probably because of the infrastructure that exists. So as we mentioned, organizations in Japan exist not just to be a business, but they exist as kind of like a home for people. You know, like if you work for a company, it's all about risk and reward. So the reason why Japanese people committed their lives to these companies and stayed with them, you know, for 30 years wasn't because it was the right thing to do. It was because of the rewards that they received. They received security. They received, for example, another thing in Japan, not only security, but they also received the ability to try new things. If you were with an organization from the time you were 25 to 45, and at 45, you're like, you know what, I've done marketing for 20 years, but I'd like to try something else. The Japanese organization, rather than losing someone that has been with the company for 20 years, will retrain you and replace and reposition you somewhere. So the reason why Japan was able to execute on that theory so well is because the infrastructure exists that the employee and the organization receive mutual benefit for the investment, right? Whereas in America, you know, they don't get healthcare and they get fired super fast and like all these, you know, other things. So that's why you kind of saw in America that, you know, that those theories ended up being more like a theory, really, rather than, you know, being, you know, lived in practice. Japan, where does it right now? Great point as well. It's changing. Some companies cannot afford to hold people, you know, on these contracts anymore because, you know, maybe they're smaller companies. For example, if you're like a small to medium enterprise and maybe you specialize in a particular technology, you can't give your employees the same contract as a company like Toyota or Mitsubishi, because you cannot ensure that you can pay salaries of 30 people, even if, you know, everyone is sick at the same time. So we're seeing a little bit of a change in terms of that, in terms of the economy. There's, you know, more and more smaller businesses are coming into play. So they can't offer those kinds of rewards to employees. But at the same time, employees are also open to trying new things. They don't want to stay at one company forever anymore, you know, because if you stay at one company forever, the idea is that you don't get promoted so quickly because you're going to be here forever. So just kind of wait your turn. You know, younger people that studied abroad or that, you know, studied in Colombia came back to Japan and they've got a little bit more, you know, Mexicans call it chisme, a little bit more fire, you know, and they want things faster, you know, they don't want to wait forever. So we're seeing that even though that essence is still very true in Japanese society, we certainly see that there's a change as well. Thank you for your question.
Okay. We have another one from Luz Estela. I think we need a little bit of context here. Luz Estela, si estás por ahí, si nos puedes dar un poquito de contexto en la pregunta, de acuerdo a tu experiencia, ¿cuáles son esas señales que da el mercado una empresa innovadora? Fran?
Maybe you're
well,
on mute.
She's asking, according to your experience, which are the signals that an innovative company or enterprise sends to the market? I don't know, in the context of your...
For me, the first thing is how well you communicate. I think that's a big thing. Is how well does this company communicate? For me, would be one of the first signs of being an innovative company, is a company that can communicate well. Because if you want to innovate, you need to move quickly, and in order to move quickly, you need alignment, and alignment comes from communication. So a company that communicates well to their stakeholders, communicates well to their employees, for me, is certainly a company that I would say is more set for innovation rather than a company that, you know, stands behind closed doors, you know, because, you know, innovation is about an ecosystem, especially in 2020. You know, we don't have to do everything alone. We need to leverage partners. We need to leverage, you know, other IP that people have, and we need to approach innovation in like an open market, you know, environment. And the way to do that is through communicating. So for me, that would probably be a signal.
Okay. So we have a question from Miguel. Miguel, you want to propose?
Yes. Good night. Good night. Thank you for your speech. It's been very good. A very good experience. And I'd like to ask you the following question. What opportunities do you visualize for Latin America respect to innovation? What skills, what advantages do you see about Latin America with respect with the rest of the world that we could exploit?
Yes. So for me, Latin America has an incredible opportunity to overtake Europe, the US, Australia, Japan, in areas where it comes to new ideas, and I'll tell you what I mean. So for example, when Latin America is built of people who you can give them this cup and you say, okay, go and make, I don't know, like a car out of it. And I'm telling you, a Mexican or a Colombian somehow will take this thing and make it roll. And I don't know how, you know what I mean? Whereas in other cultures, sometimes the infrastructure is so set that we really see that those new ideas are lacking. So I think new ideas in Latin America, you know, are really, is a really something I'm really excited about. Also, the second thing is I think that Latin American market is an incredible market that has kind of been to itself for a very long time. Like it's kind of been the support hand of many other economies. But I think that there's really so much more for Latin America to do, to not only being like a consumer, right, but really to also be a collaborator. I think that Latin America can really become, to collaborate and to contribute rather than just to consume. You know, if we think about, you know, products and services just being sent here from large global brands, this is not, you know, the Latin America of 15 years ago, of 20 years ago. This is now, you know, a different place. There's different people leading societies, leading organizations. And I'm really excited to see how, we can certainly leverage the new ideas, that new thinking of Latin America, but then also certainly see how Latin America can move from simply being a consumer to really stepping up onto the world stage, and then also being a contributor as well.
When you say contributor, do you mean to have alliances with other
Absolutely.
companies in the world?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Partnerships. So for example, if you look at what I would love to see is, you know, because of there's a lot of the Latin American market needs a lot of context like Japan does. You can more or less take a strategy from the US and copy and paste it in Australia, and it'd probably work without too much trouble, right? That's not the case in Latin America. It's totally different. Like if you think about food delivery, right? Food delivery, where people live and, you know, and addresses and the kind of data that's either that we have or we don't have, you know, is really the key to success here. So if we, for example, saw Latin America move from simply kind of just consuming things, but if you had like small to medium businesses that put their hands up and said, not only, you know, we can help you, whatever large company it is, maybe it's a Japanese company, maybe it's an American company, and we can be your local provider. We can be your local contributor. That's kind of what I'm thinking. I think there's a lot of room for Latin American companies to act as the local hand for global brands.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are getting to the end of this session. And we just wanted to thank you, Brittany, for all this sharing of your knowledge, your experiences around innovation culture. And it's been quite an insightful session. And we're sad that we cannot answer all the questions because it's an overwhelming number of questions, but it's something that happens when you have lots of people. And I don't know if you want to say something to say to end.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for the invitation. It's been such a pleasure getting to know everybody. It's been, and your questions and it's for me, I've learned just as much from this session, especially hearing from you. I just wrote my LinkedIn in the chat. If anyone has a question, feel free to send it over. To send it over directly to me. I have Google Translate, but I also have a Mexican husband, so you can write me in Spanish as well. So thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Honestly, I hope this is not the end of our conversation, rather than the beginning. So thank you so much, everybody. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Brittany.
Muchas gracias.
Fran, shall we end the translation and so we can do the final picture? Hola, bueno, les voy a pedir el favor, como siempre, de prender las camaritas para hacer el registro de la sesión. We're going to take the picture of the session, so We can use it for LinkedIn and all the social networks.
Everyone do their hair quickly.
Okay. So, arreglémonos ahí, pongámonos el maquillaje, la sonrisa. Y a la 1, a las 2 y a las... Momento, para que salga la otra parte del grupo. Perfecto.
Perfecto.
Listo. Muchas gracias, Brittany. Fue un placer.
A ti. Thank you.
Y bueno, muchas gracias a ustedes por venir el día de hoy. Y bueno, no se les olvide que nos faltan 3 días. Mañana viene el Gringo Loco. Es un personaje bien conocido en el mundo de los podcasts y de todo el tema de comunicación. Y tiene 150 conversaciones exponenciales. Ha entrevistado a Simón Borrero, a gente grande pues, de la innovación en el mundo y en Latinoamérica. Entonces es un personaje bien particular. Y tenemos un premio por ahí enredado durante la sesión, entonces no se la pierdan. Muchas gracias y feliz noche. Para los que
Gracias.
estamos en la clase, váyanse 15 minuticos y volvemos a las 50, ¿les parece? Listo. Brittany, thank you so much.
Gracias, profe. Gracias,
Orange, en
Brittany.
este mismo chat.
Gracias.
Gracias. Bye.
Brittany.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Chao, gracias.
Gracias, hasta luego.
Chao, Brittany, gracias.
Nos quedamos.
Bueno, pero vayan a comer algo, a levantarse, al
Break
baño.
obligatorio.
Oscar, ¿cuántas llevas?
Dos nomás, dos.
Ah, sí, me va a tocar bajarme a tojaste, weón. Ya vengo.
Nos quedamos aquí en este salón.